A ground war with Iran would not be a limited operation. It would be a gamble against geography, time, and a state that has spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of pressure. As of March 26, 2026, Reuters and AP describe an escalating U.S.-Iran confrontation marked by continued strikes, growing military deployments, a massive supplemental funding request in Washington, and deadlocked diplomacy over a ceasefire and the Strait of Hormuz. That is the starting point, and it is already expensive, unstable, and politically corrosive before a single American soldier is sent into Iranian territory. History should be enough to warn anyone who thinks a ground invasion can be neat, fast, or cheap. Brown University's Costs of War project says the post-9/11 wars cost the United States about $8 trillion and killed more than 900,000 people overall, while U.S. Defense Department casualty records show 4,419 deaths in Operation Iraqi Freedom and 2,354 deaths in Operation Enduring Freedom's Afghanistan theater, with tens of thousands wounded in each. Iraq and Afghanistan were supposed to be the wars of swift certainty. Instead, they became long, costly lessons in how quickly military confidence can collapse into occupation, exhaustion, and political regret. That is why the phrase ground troops in Iran should sound less like strategy and more like a warning siren. Iran is not an empty battlefield waiting to be crossed. It is a state that has built its security doctrine around asymmetric warfare, missile forces, drones, maritime denial, and proxy pressure. Recent analysis from CSIS, CFR, and other regional security researchers describes Iran's approach as a multi-domain punishment campaign. When struck, Tehran does not need to win a conventional tank battle to matter. It only needs to keep the pressure high enough to bleed its opponents financially, politically, and operationally. That strategy is already visible in the water. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important choke points on Earth, and recent Reuters reporting shows how any Iranian restriction on passage would create a severe market shock, with Barclays warning that prolonged disruption could remove 13 to 14 million barrels per day from supply. AP and Reuters describe the strait as effectively controlled by Iranian pressure, with selective passage, disrupted shipping, and diplomatic scrambling over access. Maersk has had to reroute cargo through alternative Gulf land bridge corridors for food and medicine. That is not the same as permanently owning the strait, but it is enough leverage to shake oil prices, shipping insurance, inflation, and global supply chains far beyond the Gulf. And that is exactly why a ground invasion would be catastrophic. A campaign on Iranian soil would not be a clean march to a victory parade. It would open a second and deeper war. Missiles, drones, mines, sabotage, cyber attacks, attacks on bases, pressure on shipping, and retaliation through a wider regional web. CSIS says Iranian launch rates have dropped from the opening phase of the conflict, but it also warns that Iran still retains enough launch capacity to keep inflicting damage, especially on energy systems and maritime routes. In other words, even under heavy attack, Iran remains dangerous enough to keep the war expensive and unpredictable. There is also a hard truth that should not be ignored. Iran has taken serious damage, and so have its military systems. Reuters and AP reporting say the U.S. has requested major additional funding for the war, while other current coverage describes U.S. and Israeli strikes degrading Iran's missile, drone, and naval production infrastructure. That means the battlefield picture is not one of effortless Iranian triumph. It is a grinding contest in which both sides are being hit, both sides are spending heavily, and neither side has found a clean off-ramp. The smarter reading is not that Iran is invincible. It is that Iran is resilient enough to make victory miserable for anyone who underestimates it. This is what makes the idea of sending American ground troops so dangerous. In modern war, the strongest army is not always the one that advances the fastest. It is the one that can control the political cost of staying. Iran's strength lies in making the cost of staying unbearable. It has the tools to stretch a conflict across land, sea, air, and markets. It has the ability to turn a regional war into a global economic problem. It has spent years, even decades, building a system designed not to fight like the United States, but to punish the United States for trying to fight it on Iran's own terrain. That is why a ground war would not merely be another Middle Eastern intervention, it would be a strategic trap. America's experience in Iraq and Afghanistan already proved how quickly initial confidence can turn into a long bill paid in blood and debt. Iran would add a more sophisticated and more dangerous layer, a state prepared to strike back with missiles, drones, maritime disruption, and regional escalation, while the world's energy markets watch every move. The United States could win battles and still lose the larger war of endurance, public support, and economic stability. That is the real danger. The battlefield is not just in Iran. It is in the budget, the shipping lanes, the gasoline pump, and the patience of the American people. So the warning is simple. Sending ground troops into Iran would not be a display of strength. It would be a decision that multiplies danger faster than commanders can contain it. It would invite a war of attrition against a country that has built itself for resistance, not surrender. It would risk repeating the worst lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan only under harsher conditions, with higher energy stakes, wider regional fallout, and fewer illusions left to hide behind. In that sense, the danger is not only that the war would be bigger than Iraq or Afghanistan, the danger is that it would be the kind of war from which everyone emerges poorer, angrier, and less certain that power still means control.